I'm going to say this again. I don't care if you get tired of me saying it. I'm going to say it again and again and again, and I'm going to be right about this. Shedeur Sanders is the answer for the Cleveland Browns at quarterback. Now Shedeur Sanders has a signature win. I just watched Shedeur Sanders outplay Aaron bleepin' Rodgers for all 4 quarters for a signature win against long odds. I doubt any quarterback playing a game today in the National Football League faced a higher degree of difficulty than Shedeur did against the Pittsburgh freaking Steelers, arguably the hottest team in the league on both sides of the ball. On defense, on offense, Aaron had finally come back alive, back from the proverbial dead.
Aaron Rodgers recently performed a thing which is making waves in the NFL worldwide. In addition, what he stated about Shedeur Sanders is all over the news. The famous quarterback, who is one of the best to ever play the position, held a press conference and talked about Shedeur in a way that has everyone talking. Rodgers didn't hold back. He told the truth about how he felt about watching Shedeur go from Jackson State to Colorado to the NFL. What he said is both interesting and very revealing about how one of the best football players of all time thinks about the next generation of quarterbacks. This isn't just a random comment or praise that players give each other for the cameras. Aaron Rodgers is a 4-time MVP and Super Bowl champion who has seen it all in the NFL for almost 20 years. Giving his honest opinion of a rookie quarterback who is trying to make a name for himself in the NFL. People in football are taking this young man's talent and potential very seriously, as shown by the fact that Rodgers has been closely following Shedeur's career. Let me give you some background on how this conversation came about, because it's actually pretty interesting. Rodgers was doing his usual press availability, answering questions about his team, upcoming games, and other NFL topics when a reporter asked him about playing against the sons and family members of players he had played against or with earlier in his career. Rodgers said that he's reached a point in his career where he's been in the league long enough to face the kids of former teammates and opponents. He talked about Antoine Winfield Jr. in Tampa, whose father he played against for a long time. He said that Chris Jenkins' son is now playing in the league. Then the talk turned to Shedeur Sanders, who is Deion Sanders' son and who Rodgers played against in 2005 when he was a young backup quarterback for the Packers. Deion was ending his Hall of Fame career with the Baltimore Ravens. Rodgers told a funny story about the Monday night game in Baltimore when he came in and the Packers were already losing 41-3. He said he had a good time talking to Deion between the third and fourth quarters and joked that he's glad he didn't throw an interception to primetime, even though the Packers lost 51-3. Rodgers' humility and sense of humor in admitting to a terrible loss from almost 20 years ago show the kind of perspective and self-awareness that have made him one of the most respected players in NFL history.
Here Shedeur was, remember, I'm going to remind you, Pro Football Focus ranked Shedeur's offensive line dead last in the National Football League. Pro Football Focus ranks Shedeur's receiving core dead last in the National Football League, and after today might rank them middle of the pack in college football. That's how bad his receiving core is that he was working with today.
But then Rodgers stopped talking about Deion and started talking about Shedeur. This is when things got really interesting. Rodgers said something that I think is very important and that many people will miss. He said, "I followed Shedeur's career, not just heard about it or seen some highlights." He said specifically that he has followed his career. This means that Rodgers has been paying attention, watching games, and keeping track of Shedeur's growth over time. Take a moment to think about what that means. Aaron Rodgers is one of the busiest people in professional sports. He has his own career to focus on, his own team to prepare for, and his own opponents to study. Still, he has been following a college quarterback's journey from an HBCU to a Power 5 school and then into the NFL. Rodgers doesn't do that for every young quarterback who joins the league. He doesn't spend all day watching tape of every rookie starter or draft prospect. Shedeur caught Rodgers' attention and kept it long enough for him to follow his whole career path. This says a lot about what Rodgers sees in him. People say Rodgers is one of the smartest football players ever, someone who knows a lot about how quarterbacks play. You should pay attention when someone like that says they've been following a young quarterback's career. It means that player has something special. Rodgers went on to say that any football fan who saw Shedeur go from Jackson State to Boulder knew about his talent and his story. He said that he used to be a quarterback for the Pac-12 at Cal, so he was even more interested in watching Colorado and Shedeur play in that conference. When you think about it, Rodgers saying he was rooting for Shedeur is a very interesting thing to say. This is one of the best quarterbacks ever, and he has nothing to gain by publicly supporting a young player who is trying to make a name for himself. And he's letting everyone know that he wanted Shedeur to do well. That's not just being polite at work. That's real respect and admiration for what Shedeur did in college. Shedeur led Jackson State to an undefeated season and a SWAC championship, so keep that in mind. Then he went to Colorado with his father and completely changed a program that had only won one game the year before he got there. In his first season in Boulder, Colorado went from being the worst Power 5 team in the country to winning 5 games and being talked about nationally, thanks to Shedeur's Heisman Trophy-worthy numbers. Then Rodgers talked about the draft, which might be the most controversial and painful part of Shedeur's NFL journey. Rodgers said that Shedeur had a hard time with the draft slide and that it was clearly a much longer wait than mine. For a number of reasons, this is important. First, Rodgers himself was disappointed by the draft. In 2005, he fell to the 24th pick when many thought he would go much higher, maybe even first overall.
Shedeur Sanders just operated the offense. He drove the ball. He held on to the football. They held on to the football. It was 50-50 in time of possession. I just like watching Shedeur play quarterback. This team has learned it can win games, big games, with Shedeur Sanders at quarterback. He's showing you what he's made of. He's showing you his mental and his physical toughness. He's showing you he does have wheels. He can escape on occasion. He doesn't have his daddy's wheels. Obviously, nobody ever has.
Rodgers has said many times over the years how painful that draft day was for him. He sat in the green room watching quarterback after quarterback get picked before him, feeling ignored and disrespected. So when Rodgers talks about Shedeur's draft slide, he's speaking from experience about how it feels and how hard it is to deal with that kind of disappointment on what should be one of the best days of your life. Second, and maybe even more telling, Rodgers didn't try to make excuses or sugarcoat it. He said that Shedeur's wait was much longer than his own, which meant that he fell to the 5th round instead of the late 1st round. That's a huge change from being a 1st-round pick with a guaranteed contract and the pressure that comes with it, to being a 5th-round pick that a lot of teams passed on. But this is where Rodgers' comments get really interesting, and I think he's saying something that goes deeper than what he says. The show's host said, he obviously shouldn't have fallen to the 5th round, but we all know that was planned by the league. That's something we all know. Rodgers didn't directly talk about that conspiracy theory part, but the fact that he brought up the draft slide at all and stressed how long Shedeur had to wait makes it seem like he might not completely disagree with the idea that something wasn't right about how that draft went. No matter if you think there was some kind of planned effort to make Shedeur fall, or if you think it was just normal draft evaluation and team decision-making, the fact is that a quarterback who won everywhere he played, put up historic numbers, showed elite arm talent, was mobile and athletic, was a leader, and came from one of the most football-savvy families in the history of the sport, somehow fell to the 5th round. A lot of people don't understand that, and Rodgers' admission of the difficult slide shows that. From Shedeur's point of view, what Rodgers said next could be the most important part of the whole interview. He said that even though the draft was hard for him, it looks like he's been patient, worked on his game, and played pretty well the last few weeks. There's a lot to this statement, so let's break it down. First, Rodgers praised her for being patient. In the NFL, patience is key, especially for young quarterbacks. The league is faster, harder, and more physically demanding than anything they did in college. There is a learning curve, and how a player deals with that curve and how they react to early problems and setbacks often decides whether they succeed or fail at this level. Rodgers says that Rodgers hasn't lost his cool, gotten angry in public, or panicked. That's a big deal, especially since he had to wait for his chance to start after losing in the 5th round. A lot of players in that situation would get angry and start whining about not getting enough practice time or not getting a fair shot. Rodgers knows and respects Shedeur's choice not to do any of those things. Second, Rodgers said that Shedeur has worked on his skills. This is interesting because it means that Rodgers has been keeping an eye on Shedeur's growth as well as his game performances. You can't really tell if someone is getting better at their craft unless you pay close attention to how their technique, footwork, decision-making, release, and all the other technical parts of quarterback play are changing over time. Rodgers has been studying Shedeur's game at a level beyond just watching it casually, which is why he can make this observation. He has been watching with the eyes of a coach and a quarterback, looking at the little things that make a good quarterback great. Rodgers is telling us that he sees things getting better. He sees a young quarterback who is working hard and getting better. That's a very strong endorsement coming from someone like Rodgers, who is very well known and knowledgeable. Third, and maybe most importantly, Rodgers said that Shedeur has been playing pretty well the last few weeks. This might sound like weak praise. Pretty good isn't the same as elite or phenomenal, but it depends on the situation. People know that Rodgers is careful and measured with what he says. When he talks about other quarterbacks, he doesn't tend to use exaggeration or over-the-top praise. So when Rodgers says that a rookie in the 5th round is playing behind the worst offensive line in football, with receivers who can't get open, has been playing pretty well, which is a lot of praise, Rodgers knows better than most people how hard it is to be a quarterback in the NFL. How many things need to go right for a quarterback to look good? How much quarterbacks rely on their coaches and the people around them? It's a strong sign of Shedeur's talent and potential that he can watch Shedeur play well in Cleveland's broken offense and think he's doing a good job. What I find most interesting about what Rodgers said is what he didn't say. He didn't say anything bad. He didn't say "but" after his praise. He didn't say that Shedeur needs to work on this or that. For someone like Rodgers, who is very analytical and pays attention to detail, not getting any criticism is almost as telling as getting praise. If Rodgers thought Shedeur's game had serious problems, like mechanical problems that worried him, or decision-making problems that made him nervous, he would have probably brought them up, even if he did so in a diplomatic way. Rodgers' whole review was positive, from following his career to rooting for him, to acknowledging the tough draft, to praising his work ethic and patience, to saying he's playing well. This shows that Rodgers really thinks Shedeur has what it takes to do well in this league. It's also important to think about the bigger picture of this interview. Rodgers was answering questions about a lot of different things, like problems with his own team, how players and fans act, and how different offensive formations and personnel groups work. Rodgers might have just answered the Shedeur question quickly and moved on, but it could have been a throwaway moment. Instead, he thought about it carefully, talked about specific memories of playing against Dion, admitted that he was very interested in following Shedeur's career, and gave a detailed analysis of what he saw from the young quarterback. That level of interest shows that Rodgers wasn't just being polite or saying what he thought people wanted to hear. This was real interest and real respect between two quarterbacks from different generations. The link between Rodgers and Shedeur through Deion Sanders is also kind of poetic. At the end of Primetime's legendary career, Rodgers fought Deion. One Hall of Famer giving the torch to another. Now, almost 20 years later, Rodgers is watching Deion's son try to make a name for himself in the NFL. This is a full-circle moment that connects different eras of football. Rodgers clearly cares about and respects the Sanders family's legacy, and that respect goes to Shedeur as well. When someone like Rodgers, who has seen and played against the best players in NFL history, looks at Shedeur Sanders and sees something worth following, praising, and believing in, that means a lot. Rodgers' advice on how to deal with hard times also applies to Shedeur's situation. Rodgers was technically answering a different question about a young player on his own team, but he talked about how important the mental side of being a young player in the NFL is. Not just learning the X's and O's, but also how to deal with problems. He said that everyone has problems at some point in their career, but it's harder when you're younger because it feels more serious and like it can break your stability. That's what Shedeur has been through. It's hard to fall to the 5th round when you thought you should have been a first-rounder. The hard part about being thrown into a starting role behind a bad offensive line with few weapons. The hard part is dealing with constant criticism from people in the media, like Jason Lloyd, who use fake stats and cherry-pick data to tear you down. It's hard to prove yourself when you have to deal with all the outside noise about your father, nepotism, and whether you're really good or just getting ahead because of your last name. All of that is exactly the kind of foundational adversity Rodgers was talking about, and from what we've seen, Shedeur has dealt with it with amazing maturity and mental strength. It's interesting that Rodgers himself is the best example of how to deal with disappointment in the draft and use it as motivation. Rodgers dropped to 24th overall and sat behind Brett Favre for 3 years, during which time people asked if he would ever get his chance. And when he finally got the chance to start, he became one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history. He used that draft snub as fuel to get ready and do well. He's talked about how that experience changed him many times over the years. He still has a chip on his shoulder because of it. Rodgers probably sees some of himself in Shedeur when he looks at him. A good quarterback who went lower in the draft than he should have and now has to prove everyone wrong. That's a story that Rodgers knows very well. And that's probably why he's been so interested in Shedeur's career. Rodgers' comments also stand out because he admits that Shedeur is still a rookie in some ways. Learning how to play in the NFL, improving his skills, and figuring out how to do well at this level. In the world of sports media, that's an important piece of information that often gets lost. People want to make quick decisions about players and call them franchise saviors or bust after just a few games. But Rodgers, who has been in the league for 20 years, knows that it takes time to develop a quarterback. Even the best quarterbacks have trouble at first because they have to get used to how fast and complicated the NFL game is. As a rookie, Peyton Manning threw 28 picks. Troy Aikman was 0-1 as a rookie starter. Josh Allen seemed to be lost for the first few years before he broke through. The list goes on and on. Rodgers needed 3 years of holding a clipboard and learning before he could start. That's the point of view of someone who knows a lot about how quarterbacks develop over time, when he says that Shedeur is still developing, but playing pretty well and working on his craft. Shedeur must feel very validated that Aaron Rodgers publicly supports him and talks about how great his career is. Picture a 22-year-old rookie trying to make a name for himself in the NFL while constantly being criticized and doubted. Then one of the best players of all time says, "He's been following your career. He was rooting for you in college. He thinks you're playing well and respects how you've dealt with hard times." That must make you feel a lot more sure of yourself. It's also the kind of endorsement that people in the league pay attention to. People pay attention when Rodgers talks. Everyone, from coaches and general managers to other players and the media, respects Rodgers' opinion on quarterback play because he's one of the best ever at it. Even in this pretty casual press conference setting, Shedeur's profile and credibility go up in ways that statistics and highlight reels can't. There is a big difference between how Aaron Rodgers talks about Shedeur and how someone like Jason Lloyd talks about him. Rodgers, who has studied the game for decades and knows what it takes to be a great quarterback, watches Shedeur and sees talent, potential, a strong work ethic, patience, and good play. Lloyd, a journalist with a goal and fake numbers, watches Shedeur and thinks he's the worst quarterback in the history of the NFL. What do you think is the more reliable assessment? Whose opinion should be more important? It's clear what the answer is. There is no reason for Rodgers to lie about what he sees in Shedeur. He doesn't gain anything by helping a Browns rookie quarterback. In fact, he'd probably get more attention if he was critical or dismissive, since that's what the media likes these days. He decided to be honest and positive instead, because that's how he really feels when he watches the tape. It's also important that Rodgers specifically said he watched Shedeur at Jackson State. A lot of NFL players and scouts didn't pay much attention to Shedeur when he was at an HBCU because there is still bias in this league about how good the competition is at historically black colleges. But Rodgers wasn't like that. He saw Shedeur do well at Jackson State and knew he was talented no matter what conference he was in. Then he saw Shedeur go to a Power 5 school and keep playing at a high level against much better competition. Rodgers knew everything he needed to know about Shedeur's skills because he kept making plays at different levels, in different conferences, and with different supporting casts. The player has real talent, their skills transfer, and they can do well no matter what. That's what a real evaluation looks like. Not the lazy stories that say he only did well because of his dad or because the competition was weak. The timing of Rodgers' comments is also interesting. These comments were made during the current NFL season. Shedeur is still playing and trying to make a name for himself, but Rodgers could have waited until the offseason when Shedeur had more games under his belt, or when there was less scrutiny on the young quarterback. Instead, he chose to speak up now, when Shedeur needs positive voices in his corner. When he's dealing with people who don't believe in him and people who are still forming their opinions about him. That means Rodgers wanted to use his platform and his reputation to help make that story better. It doesn't matter if Rodgers did it on purpose or just because he was honest when asked a question. The effect is the same. One of the legends of the game is backing the next generation, which makes a link between the past and the present that can only help Shedeur as he moves on in his NFL career. It would be interesting to look more closely at the similarities between Rodgers' career and Shedeur's current situation. There were questions about both quarterbacks' draft stock when they joined the league. Both of them had to deal with being passed over by several teams. Both of them had to show what they could do in tough situations. They both had to deal with people who didn't believe in them and who were against them. Rodgers used his disappointment in the draft to build a Hall of Fame career. Them using that chip on his shoulder to work harder and do better than everyone who passed him up. Will Shedeur go down a similar path? We don't know for sure yet, but the first signs are good. He has the talent, the work ethic, the mental toughness, the family background, and the coaching from his father. Now he has the support of one of the best quarterbacks ever. If they can all work together in the right way, those are all things that can help you succeed. It's also important to note that Rodgers didn't just say nice things like, he's a good player, or he has potential. He gave specific examples of Shedeur's patience, work ethic, and recent play. That level of detail makes it seem like Rodgers has really been paying attention and making decisions based on what he's seen. This wasn't just a nice way to answer a question about a different quarterback. This was real analysis from someone who knows what they're watching and has taken the time to really watch it. In a time when most sports commentary is just hot takes and uninformed opinions, it's nice and helpful to have someone like Rodgers give deep, specific analysis. Rodgers' comments mean that people in football, like players and coaches who really know the game, see something in Shedeur that some media members and casual fans don't. Jason Lloyds and other people can use their cherry-picked EPA stats and anonymous sources all they want, but when real Hall of Fame quarterbacks say they've been following your career and you're doing pretty well, that tells you whose opinion you should trust. People in football see Shedeur's talent. They see the possibilities. They see the hard work and the progress. They know how hard it is for him, so they grade him accordingly. What matters is the evaluation, not the hot takes from media people with their own agendas. It must be nice for Browns fans to hear Aaron Rodgers say nice things about their young quarterback. After years of bad quarterbacks and disappointments after the Deshaun Watson trade blew up in their faces after going through dozens of quarterbacks over 2.5 decades, they may have finally found the right one. And one of the best quarterbacks of all time is telling you he's been watching. He likes it and sees the potential. That doesn't mean they'll win, but it does mean that the Browns might be on the right track with Shedeur. At the very least, it means they should be patient, keep working on him, give him the tools and offensive line he needs to succeed, and ignore the critics who don't know what they're talking about.